Manhattan. Check it out. I'm at Renegade Studios. We're going to check it out right now. There he is.
Just hanging out in an elevator as one does.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jeff Sanoff, and I'm taking you into Renegade Studios. But first, the slowest elevator
All right.
in New York City.
We're taking it. All right, so here we are walking into Renegade Studios in Manhattan, New York. Or what's the city? Because is it Lower East Side, West Side? Where are we at?
We are in the Village.
The Village.
The Village, very, very centrally located in the
Okay. Show me around.
So
here.
come on through.
Yep.
First thing you see is our live room, and watch your step.
Yeah.
Got a little ramp for loading in gear.
Wow.
I'm fortunate enough to have a pretty good collection of mics, and because I'm pretty much the only engineer that works in here. The origin of the studio. This studio belongs to little Steven Van Zandt of E Street Band fame, as well as The Sopranos, as well as Little Steven and the Disciples of Soul, Lilyhammer. He's a very prolific man, very talented, and very generous. And so he thought it would be cool to have a studio because he's got all these projects.
Yeah.
And so he built it, and then we met at a studio that I used to work at because this place was under construction. And
so it's not one of those places in New York that was always a studio. He just happened to get a building.
He, was renting the floor and realizing he's just an ambitious guy, and he's always got lots of ideas and lots of stuff going on. So it's just a lesson in how important it is if you work in the freelance world that you always got to be trying to light sparks, because you never know which thing is going to catch and which thing is going to go. So that's him, right? So he started a record label. He's got a radio show. He's a musician. Naturally, a recording studio would come in handy. So he kind of built it with the idea that it should serve for recording live bands. That's kind of the ethos of this place. And so over the time that I've been in here with him, I've been able to sort of carve out more and more little nooks for things. So let me show you some of the, so this is your basic tracking room, right? We've got the drum kit.
Pretty high ceilings. How high are these?
I think they're probably about 14 feet. They're not super high, but they're, and now this is an interesting thing. I personally, if you were to ask me where would I put the drum kit, I probably would not have picked a corner with a brick wall.
Yeah.
But when they were making Hungry Heart with Bruce Springsteen, that's what they did with the drums, and they've been doing that ever since.
Got to put the kit in the corner.
Kit in the corner with the brick wall is the important thing. It's the reflections that adds the energy. And you know what? It's been this way since I started recording in here, and I'm not going to mess with it because it's got a magic to it.
And I got to say,
the drum riser is a part of that too, which is kind of funny. Because again, things I wouldn't have done in other places, but it was kind of set this way. That was sort of one of the few things I'm like, this is how my studio is going to be set up. And I sort of like, okay, well then I'm going to make it work, and I'm going to learn how to make stuff sound great.
I noticed you have some of my favorite mics.
Yes.
C12As. Now, how did you acquire these? Are these part of his gear, or how does that work out?
So most of the equipment belongs to him, but I do have a couple of choice pieces, and the C12As were something that came to me. I bought those about 3 years ago. I think I got them right before the pandemic. My friend was brokering them for the guy, one of the Strokes was selling them. And so I was like, actually, I would really like a pair of really nice condensers. And I knew about those from having used them at a studio in Brazil.
Nice.
And so it sort of became, I used to use Coles on my overheads, and those kind of, I don't know, there's something what they do to cymbals I really like, because they have enough sparkle without being harsh, So
well, I am a believer in that, because I had a pair and they're amazing. And people that don't know about the C12 history would be, you can find pictures of Jim Morrison using them, David Bowie using them, Rush overheads at their studio up in Canada. Queen. It was a classic. My friend got a pair because he swore that that's David Bowie's acoustic guitar sound. So
they sound good on guitars. I definitely, I mean, they're kind of locked in for me. I just have them on overheads, but yeah, guitars is definitely, if I feel like, breaking up my system, then that's definitely where they'd end up.
Well, I can tell that there's kind of this live setup here where everything's kind of mic'd up. So you kind of have, I'm assuming, like, your go-tos, everything's kind of ready to go with minimal, of setup. Can you explain to me?
Sure.
I know we just, so people can know here, I know it isn't like I just walked out. We actually did a recording session together, and our meeting is really organic. I came here last night for a buddy of mine, Johnny Temple, to drop off a guitar head. He goes, "Oh, you like my friend Jeff? He has a studio." And I'm like, "Oh, this is just a whatever studio." I'm like, "No, man, this is like a world class recording studio." And we got on well. And I'm here for AES in New York, so that was which really brings me here.
Yeah.
So we did some vocals, and share us about in
So
reverse engineering what we did today.
what we did was we had two mics kind of placed. They ended up a little bit off axis here, but the idea was we don't know which is going to sound best on his voice. We'll set them up so that they can both be used. And it turns out they actually kind of sounded good used together, which isn't always the case.
And that's a U67.
It's a U67 and a U47.
Do you know what era of years they are, technically?
This is, I think, later in the U47 timeline. I would say late 60s, maybe. And this is mid 60s. This is kind of like the nice era. And then on the floor here, we have these BULS 414s, and kind of picking up the singer in the ambience of the room, but in a sort of off-kilter way. So you get an interesting take on a room sound, and we had them set with a little compression, so they really kind of kick in when he's getting louder, and then a little short delay to add kind of time space to it, like add some depth to it, but without losing the detail you get from being closer, but it sort of feels wider. So
well, one thing you can say with me, I'm all about mic porn, and I love microphones, and I don't have ladies on my phone. I have microphones. So considering some more pictures for that, can you maybe give me a little bit of a run through of maybe some mics that you spoke about the
well, I'll show you this mic.
Yeah, let's talk about this, because we actually really didn't talk about this mic.
So this mic, the history of this mic is it's an SM69 that I bought from Don Zientara at Inner Ear Studios when he was closing shop.
Yeah.
And it had been used there.
No, Inner Ear, to people, that would be...
Oh, sorry, yeah. So that's the studio made famous by Discord Records, well, by Don Zientara and Eli Janney, and Jay Robbins. Fugazi, Minor Threat, Dag Nasty, The Faith, all the sort of early Discord stuff were done in variations of Inner Ear Studios.
In DC, correct?
It was in DC. It was actually in Virginia, in Shirlington, Virginia. But that studio had a pretty long history of being. It started out in Don's house, and then it moved into a bigger space. So this wasn't something that this was definitely probably an overhead on at least one Fugazi record. But
where's the power supply for that?
It's a FET.
Oh, it's a FET.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it's a stereo mic, and it's great on drum overheads. I've been trying to figure out, because I've only had it for like a short time, trying to learn what its strengths are, and I like it as a room mic. I used to use 57s for room mics because it always seemed like when you do record a drum, like a live drum set or a live band basic tracks, the talkback mics were always the ones that seemed like they were the coolest drum sounds. And at a certain point, I was like, well, why don't I just use those for the drum rooms rather than get fancy? Yeah. But I like this guy. It's kind of, you get some
beautiful
of that.
Mic.
Yeah.
It looks so classic. I may have to be hunting for one now,
Well, and because it has a dual capsule, you can use it for vocals and have one go through like a distortion channel and one be...
That's so killer. Where are they facing and which way?
Right now, it's facing forward. So it's just...
That's the front we're looking at.
The badge is the front. I put this piece of tape on there because when you put it... So that's like...
It turns.
Yeah, it rotates. And then that's sort of the front.
All right, everybody. We're looking for that mic. What is the model number again?
It's an SM69.
Wow. Okay,
FET.
And then I noticed you have some of those Josephsons. What made you even get these, and how was your experience with these?
So at some point, I started doing top and bottom tom miking.
Double miking.
And, it's that thing where you get the bottom, you get a little bit longer tone, and depends on the drummer, of course. But and so I used to use 414s on the top, but they were kind of, that also puts them in the line of fire.
Yep.
And I was at a studio here called Flux, and they had these, and I was been wanting to try them. They had gotten them in, so I thought I would give them a shot. And I was like, "Whoa, these are the best!" And they're great because they're small. They're small. I think Steve Albini was involved in the design of these, and it makes sense because that's the perfect size for miking any kind of drum because it's not going to get hit, but it also still has the like condenser mic mojo.
Any other mics on the kit, or what's your usual miking of the drum set? I know it may be hard to tell on the camera, but maybe give me a run through of what usually is set up here and what's your go-tos.
Okay, so my go-to, starting with the kick drum, is a D12. An old.
That's inside.
That's correct? Inside, yeah. Okay. I like that. It has like kind of nice woody sound on the beater. It kind of sounds like a 70s disco record or a Clash record or something. Then this Rode NT1 on the outside, which is
cool.
I was looking for something to put on the outside. We used to use a FET 47, but I didn't have one here. And Eli Janney had a Charter Oak that we would sometimes use. But this Rode is actually kind of a good secret weapon for this because it can take the SPL and it just kind of it gives you a good punch. And then the sub kick is kind of like
we know
it's one of those things. Sometimes I blend it in there, sometimes I don't bother with it. Then snare, I've tried a bunch of stuff, but the 57 sort of I always end up coming back to it. I know people like those Buyers that are 201s. I think they are. Those are pretty good, but KM84s.
451s on the hi-hat?
Yeah.
Now, technically, you could say that you mic it traditionally. Is there anything in there besides the mic choice that is anything like in the rooms? Do you do anything around here that like you're like, oh, when I set up a drum set, this is what I got to do? Besides the typical miking?
I usually have a front mono kit mic that sort of gets the whole kit, and then that, depending on the band, would get compressed pretty good. And then usually there's one on the back side. I used to aim it at the drummer's butt,
right.
Which is but then Steven was like, "No, man, you gotta aim at the wall. It needs to." You know what?
Yeah.
I just listen to him because he's usually right. So
he's right. That's the corner is the bomb, right?
So it's kind of like,
I see it. Is that the one?
Yeah, and you can see where the tape has pulled I used to use PZMs too. That was like that also works well in that application. But the 57, it's bulletproof, and it looks innocuous.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have a lot of synthesizers, but over here we've got we've got a proper Hammond that was purchased for the Rascals, the Young Rascals, when Steven got them back together to do a Broadway run. We got these Hammonds in with a Leslie, and I mean, there's nothing like it. Like it's a beast.
Now, in homage to little Steven, he's also claimed to fame. He's in The Sopranos.
Yes.
He's one of the main actors in there. And what was the other show you mentioned that he had?
Lilyhammer.
Okay.
So that's another mob oriented show that was on Netflix, and we did the score for that here, which was amazing. That was one of the early projects I did with him, where I was really kind of put to the test, because that was recording a live band in this space.
Yeah.
But the live band was drums, upright bass, and then either 5 or 9 horn players.
Wow.
And sometimes keyboard, piano, or whatever. And then, of course, overdubs of different, and a lot of times the way Steven likes to work is he'll be writing the horn lines in his head and he'll sing them, and then he can arrange them, but it's faster if you get the guy who writes out the sheet music.
Yeah, yeah.
But we're doing this on the fly, and these guys are like sitting around going, "What?" And then all of a sudden, boom! Because they're all such good players that once the idea is on the page, they just execute.
You get it.
But meanwhile, you got 9 or 10 guys in here, and these are not necessarily the youngest of men. It's pretty amazing to watch all of a sudden just the
blossom,
record, and boom, there's something that didn't exist before. Yeah. So we've got our choice here of two different colors.
That's from a flip top.
Yeah. So the cabinet's down there. I had it broken out. I actually prefer,
it's a little dark, but
I prefer it's a newer 115 speaker, but it's kind of like, it gives you the good combination of the tube harmonics, and this is kind of the like, oh, when this guy dies, we bust this guy out, and this thing is kind of a good, if you need a low cost and also lightweight bass amp. I mean, these things are great. They're like, they have this gain thing where you can volume and gain, so you can like kind of fuzz them out.
So it's kind of like that's always going. So you got your bass set. I got a cab down here. I got a D112. What's the other one? It's kind of taped up or blocked.
Oh, it's a Royer 121. I just keep the cover on because I keep the
So the Royer is what you guys use for your bass rigs?
The Royer and the
isn't that illegal?
Well, in some states, but in New York they passed a law, so we're.
I see we have an assortment of some guitar pedals. Oh, there you go. Some tape echo. Tell me about what we got here.
All right. Well, a lot of this stuff is left over from earlier periods of time, and fuzz pedals are a big part of the Little Steven guitar sound. So this is kind of the mother.
Oh yeah. I think that's like the Rolling Stones Satisfaction.
Yeah, it is, and that's why we have it. But it also does something that is like kind of unique, and it's surprising because it's really uncontrollably, but when it just works, it sounds great.
And obviously, you have a Roland Space Echo, and you covered your tape echoes because there's a Maestro MP3, and that's actually one of my favorites right there. Is that an MP3 or 4?
I think it's a 3.
Probably a 3.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we've got another kind of cool secret weapon, this vibrato pedal.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a little bit, and it's like nice and kind of beautiful.
Got a tube screamer over there as well.
Yep. And then I love this thing.
Oh, yeah, those are so great.
I got this in New Orleans in 1995, and it's like, it doesn't even have the chorus, just the pre-chorus one. So it's super noisy, but the feedback on it is like, it's like an instrument unto itself.
That is great.
And then this one, my good friend Nathan Larson got me one of these because he knew how much I liked his. And it's basically the front end of a deluxe. It's got a reverb and a tremolo in it. And it sounds great.
I've never seen that. What is it called?
It's a Mr. Black's Deluxe Plus pedal from Portland, I guess is where they're from. It's a really like so useful.
Man, that sounds great. I love those kind of things.
I forget what the model is. 4051s, yeah. And then on the bottom is a Beta 52.
Well, this is just mic'd up all the time.
Yeah, the thing with these is that they're so sensitive, you kind of got to get them pointed down because you end up getting too much wind on them. And I don't want to put a windscreen because then you lose some of the top.
But look at that foam block right there. What the hell?
Yeah, it's kind of Kludge Industries foam. You have to go to the... Yeah, we got all this foam from a guy who was closing his studio down, and I just kind of got people to cut it up and put it to use.
Wow.
So,
and it's on foam as well, so it's totally like...
Yeah.
So it doesn't vibrate.
Doesn't vibrate, and the bass and the Leslie cabinet can kind of coexist. I mean, they bleed. If I have them going at the same time, the bass gets onto the Leslie, but it's okay. This is where I usually have singers stand when we're doing lives, and they can see through the door and they can see me. But what's surprising is that sometimes people like being in small closets, and it actually works because it's, again, quite a high ceiling. It has enough air, so that even though it's dead, it doesn't feel like mess. And
those headphone boxes with the little talkback on it, that's so cool.
These things are awesome. The hearbacks. Yeah, CAD 5. It's like easiest thing to wire. You don't have to have big harnesses.
Cool.
All right. It's the mothership.
Wow. If you can imagine, it's like we're in Manhattan. How many channels does this need?
60.
60, and it was cut down, right?
It was 72, and then to get it in this room, they cut it down by 12. So.
Wow.
Which is fine, because in the modern era, how often are you mixing like 72 channels, unless you're doing TV or live stuff?
Yep. Now, I'm going to just take a real quick peek at our backdrop here. That is
Slava Ukraine, man.
Building. So when you're recording here, you can actually get a wonderful view of the city.
We've got some kind of classic guitars, so I don't know when he got this, but I'm guessing it was kind of a while ago. If you like Stratocasters, we've got like 6 or 7 of them.
What?
Yeah, well, I guess there was a point in time where Steven played a telly, and then when he started playing with Bruce asked if he would mind if Steven played a different guitar so that Bruce could play telly.
We're talking about Bruce Springsteen?
Yes.
And then, so tell me, what year is this guitar?
I think it's like mid-50s. I really don't know.
Look at that body.
But I tell you, man, it sounds freaking amazing. This guitar is like,
look at that neck.
I'm not like the biggest Strat fan, and this thing is like, this thing is just money in the bank as far as that goes. If you want a single coil guitar, this is the best selling one. David Kahn has a 51 Telly that might be better, but this is.
That is a beautiful guitar. So that's one of the many gems you could just pull out for a session.
Yes, it's fun.
Wow.
It's so fun to be like, oh, I think I might have the tool for that. I forget. I think it's 1955.
Oh my God.
Brian Baker was the one who told me what year it was, because he's like but it's original pickups. Whoa. Les Paul
with the body.
Yeah, with the P90s and the blade in the front. So the secret weapon that's sort of unexpected is that usually on every record, if it's musically appropriate, there ends up being a 12-string, because that just seems like it works on some things. And I know you're the authority on 12 or on 8-string basses.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've discovered here, this is not the one I'm looking for, it's this one, is that this Rickenbacker, it's the Tom Petty signature, Rick, and it's a Rickenbacker 660-12.
No, but it's not a Tom Petty, right? It was the original version that became the Tom Petty, or is it literally like Guitar Center Tom Petty?
I think it's pre-Tom. This might be the non-Tom Petty. I thought he had one that, it's awesome. And I tell you, man, something about the solid body part of it, it like connects when you're recording it. It just like, you put it through a twin or a deluxe, and then put it through that guy, the Gibson GA40.
Oh man, that's a beautiful amp.
That is a killer amp. Put it through that, and then a little DBX 160, crank it up on the compression, and you're mwah.
Wow, right?
So when the studio was built in 2010, it was pretty much radio silence here. It wasn't too bad with the RF and stuff, because even though the Empire State Building is right there and there's radio antennas within line of sight, somehow we ended up being reasonably safe. But then around year 5 or 6, they put a cell tower right across the street. You can't see it because it's dark out.
Yeah.
But it's right at the same height, and it's just right across from where the amp room is. And so I was like, what am I going to do? FCC was like, it's your problem. We found this nickel fabric that's sold. It's cheap. It's like you can buy this stuff for like $20 for a pack on Amazon. And it's sold to people who think they're Steven Seagal, like total douchebag dudes who like, when I'm flying in my helicopter and doing like advanced weapon sales,
Yeah.
But what it actually is good for is probably not that. It's good for at least decreasing the noise from RF, and it's really good. Like if you have a Wurlitzer, Wurlitzers are low output, so when you start putting them through amps and stuff, you can pick up a lot of RF and cell phone noise. And
when you have a noisy big muff, can you throw that over your fuzz pedal? Will it keep the radio station out?
It can.
Wow.
It's not 100%, but it definitely can improve it. And I've done that many, many times where you just kind of wrap it around it. And that's the one thing
that's a true life hack for studios. All right, so here we are. We've done our tour. I just wanted to sit down and kind of end my Manhattan trip with kind of a story a little bit about who you are. I know, like, the true story of how I ended up here was a dear friend, Johnny Temple, had asked me if I wanted to drop a Marshall off at my buddy's studio. I have no idea what a studio would look like in Manhattan. And then I come up in the elevator 6 floors and I open up to this wonderful place. And I was just kind of blown away. And instantly there was this camaraderie. I don't know where that came from, but we really...
brothers in arms.
We really bonded hard. So I actually came in here today and did a whole vocal session with my buddy that came down from Philadelphia, who saw me in New York and just randomly called me and said, "Hey man, is there a studio we can go work at?" And I was like, Well, by the way, there's this guy Jeff I just met, and so we had a ball today. We had that elaborate mic setup that we did. The session went so great, and I decided to my one of my stops would be visiting you, and I just got to say I'm completely blown away. But not only your work ethic, what you've done, but how you've uh, encompassed probably a great collective of vibes, gear. There's tape machines over there. I'll get a shot of later, and it's just amazing, man.
Well,
So you're Jeff. Who are you, and how did you get here?
well, I guess I would say it started when I was a kid going to record stores in Washington, D.C., where I grew up, or outside of D.C. in Maryland. And the record store that we would go to, we kind of figured out at a certain point that the records that we were buying from like some of the local punk and hardcore bands were the guys in the bands were actually working at the store. And so, you know, having Ian MacKaye suggest, hey, what high school did you go to? I'll make you a tape of the Artificial Peace demo, or having Brendan
Wow.
Canty, hey man, you should get this Buzzcocks record, like that, or Michael Hampton, this is the Wire record you guys want. Like
Yeah.
having those guys as sort of like,
Wire is one of the greatest bands that no one
Well,
really talks about.
Empire was the one that everybody was like, oh,
I thought it
Empire
was
record.
Pink Flag, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. So Empire is a band that had guys from Generation X.
Oh, that's right.
And it's like this one, it's like the sort of lost scroll of DC hardcore where it's like, if you want to hear Michael Hampton's Embrace guitar sound, it's basically, you know, him doing the Empire thing. They made this one record and then nothing happened with the band. And it's like this kind of document that in our community was like a big deal. And so I was lucky enough to sort of, as a younger initiate, be exposed to that.
And to someone out there that wouldn't know what the DC scene, when we talk about that, was, it was a scene that was very exclusive to DC, and Discord would only sign bands from DC, but somehow the bands had spread out through all of America by word of mouth and record stores and became one of the most legendary labels. And not only that, the bands on the label, Rites of Spring, and then
Fugazi,
Fugazi,
Soulside, of course, and Minor Threat is
yep.
sort of the granddaddy.
And some of the people that he mentions were people from Fugazi working at a record store, which is insane that you think now that you are working at a place with some of the most legendary
well, I just would show
artists.
up and buy records, you know, and so what it sort of made music feel attainable is that you could go in the store and like it didn't matter. There was like this weird, and I don't mean like, oh man, I'm one with the artist in this sort of silly Spinal Tap way. It was like, I mean, literally these people were just like, oh, normal people that are working in a record store, and you go see their band and they're awesome.
Yeah.
And so then of course what happens is you end up wanting to play music, and then, you know, I got out of college and I joined my friend's band, and our you know, the 90s, they were throwing money around and our band got signed. And then I realized at a point when we had a lot of money for now, but not a lot of money for then, we got to go to Liverpool to make a record.
Oh, wow.
And I became really, really good friends with Andy Wilkinson, who was the engineer on our record, and realized that what he was doing is what I had always wanted to be doing. And I was like, you know, the band could end tomorrow, but I would really miss being in a studio.
Yeah.
So when we got back to New York, because I had moved up here by that point, I just started, you know, pounding the pavement trying to get a gig. And I didn't have the diploma from a recording school. So I eventually ended up in a much more smaller place, where Fountains of Wayne had just made their first record.
That's a great band, you know, and also rest in peace.
Yeah, Adam
you know?
Schlesinger, man, what a force of nature, and a great.
To those that also wouldn't know, not only was it a legendary band, he was a great songwriter, but during one of our darkest periods in modern history of the pandemic, he became ill and passed away, and it was a shock. It was one of the first times, I guess, the awakening of that you could get sick and pass away, and it broke not only the hearts of his families and friends, but across the United States of people that appreciate art. That guy,
yeah, it was a real
represented
loss.
a lot of, and not only that, you'll explain more. It wasn't just about the band, you know.
Well, to go back to just the linearity of the story is, I met Adam at that studio where his co-partner Andy Chase was in a band called Ivy, and so they were working on an Ivy record, and the studio had changed configurations and brought in the third partner named James Ehoff from the Smashing Pumpkins. And so these guys had a studio that was in the meatpacking district, and then there was a fire, and it's New York real estate, blah, blah, blah. We ended up at a really nice studio in Chelsea that those guys built, and I was the main guy there for a long time, and worked on a lot of great records, including most of the Fountain stuff after that. And then
and those records sound great. I know I'm just met you a day ago, but that's
well, the biggest
awesome.
record I'm a pretty honest person. I won't take credit for the biggest record, Stacy's Mom. I was kind of around for, but I wasn't a key member. The other ones after that, the last two, I was much more involved with. But that's where I met Little Steven. He had brought a band in there because this place hadn't been finished being built yet.
Yeah.
And we kind of hit it off. And so he's like, I want you to come work in my studio. And I was like, okay, that sounds cool. And I didn't know what that would mean.
Was that when he was in Bruce Springsteen, or he'd already not done as much as Bruce Springsteen stuff?
So he kind of
and the radio show too. That was all before all that, right?
He left the E Street Band around Born in the USA, which would be around 84, 85. And then went on to do his own stuff for a bunch of years, and then kind of was doing the radio thing, and then got on The Sopranos. Did The Sopranos for 10 years, and then Bruce kind of got the band back together, and Steven went back to doing that. And, he started a record label, and so he brought this band into our studio, into Stratosphere. And, he just kind of was like, hey, can you come by and just tell me what kind of gear you would want in a studio? And I gave him a list of mics and stuff. And I had no idea. I thought he'd just ask me questions like, you seem like you know what you're doing. What does somebody like you want? But I think the next thing I knew, I didn't hear from him for like 5 or 6 months, which is kind of typical. He's a very busy, active guy. I get a phone call. Hey, it's Stevie. What are you doing? I'm doing something with me and the guys for the new Chase movie. And it's like, wait, the new Chase movie? You mean David Chase, who made The Sopranos, and he's making his directorial debut, and you're making the music for it? Okay, that sounds good.
Wow.
So I show up to this studio. There's no assistant. I check it out. It's now been finished, and I say, "Hey, I need a couple days just to get the lay of the land." So I brought in friends to record, And then the morning of the recording, I see this guy who you absolutely, if you can track him down, have to do an interview with, because he is a legend in New York City studios. His name is Artie Smith, and he's a drum doctor.
Okay. Oh yeah.
And he was like the guy in LA, except for he was the New York version. Guys would have him come in and tune the drums. And he had every piece of gear. If you wanted a 1940s J45, he could get you that. If you want the best Les Paul, he's got that. He's got 10 drum kits.
Not only drums, he's at other instruments too.
But to hear him play a drum, he couldn't play it to save his life. It's like hilarious. But he could tune them better than anyone you ever met. And he's a total character. Just like great stories, just a big personality, and really like a rite of passage for anybody who started out working in New York. Anyway, I see Artie come up this elevator, and I'm like, the light bulb goes on. Because I didn't really make the connection that Steven was talking about doing something with the E Street guys. He just, me and the guys. I don't know. That could be anybody, right?
Who are the guys, right?
It's Max Weinberg. That's who's come to set his drums up. And I'm like,
oh my God,
I better not fuck this up, because, my hand's on the remote control because we're doing the tape and then dumping it in. And I'm like, woo! But, it went well enough. And that ended up being a movie called Not Fade Away. Which was about a 60s band, and it was really fun because the thing was they were supposed to play kids learning how to play in a band. So at first they really sucked, and it was funny because they were like playing shitty fills, and then as they got better, they got better. So that was fun, and there was actors in that movie who've gone on to some pretty big things. So that really great project, and that kind of just kept going.
As you worked in there, he was just like of course he liked you as a friend and he saw your work ethic, but how did it become where you were just like, you would start to invest your gear into making this your home?
Well,
or what was that turning point? What made you come up to that decision, living here in wonderful New York?
I've always been freelance, but essentially what happened was we would spend so much time on projects, and then I wouldn't hear from him, and then we went for like about almost 2 years of just working on stuff nonstop, and then I knew he was going back on tour, and it was kind of like, what are you gonna do? I know you're going to call me at some point while you're on tour and ask me to do something, and I might be in the middle of something else by that point. So if you want me to stick around, we got to figure out how we can make this work for both of us. Yeah. And he was really open to that, because he's a mentor in a lot of ways that I never knew I was going to get that. You know what I mean? You work for somebody, and I would say this about Adam too. I mean, Adam and I were friends in a different way because we were the same age, but you have these two people that are such musicians, and they're so musical, and they're so songwritery, and they're just so filled with like ideas, and
Yeah,
it's pretty awesome to get to
that's
have
rad.
those people in your life
I
for any
mean,
length of time.
I will say this on to people that would be watching this that may not even be American or understand how our United States is laid out. You always hear about rappers, East Coast, West Coast,
Yes,
all these, then you got the Midwest and, down in Texas and Florida, and you got all this like ideas of how the
right.
cultures all do it. One thing when I was younger, and I started to be in a band, I had met Johnny Temple, one of our dearest friends, and knowing the history of Fugazi, Girls Against Boys, and a lot of DC to Chicago, my mind, the Chicago people and the DC people and the New York people, they were all the same.
Right.
There was these community of artists that helped each other. I never really heard about them bickering or being like, I didn't hear like feuds, but I saw them help out everyone. And when I was in Los Angeles, which is, you can think of all the stereotypes that come with living in Los Angeles, I I felt like when I started my studio in the community of bands, I wanted some of that. It never really happened the way. I think there was a time when everything, it's almost like a magnifying glass when you focused it and it was really focused, that you all, and I'll include all of my friends and your friends, are some of the greatest people that not only made music, but great people. And that's something that I was really blown away. Even meeting you and Eli, who actually is in Girls Against Boys, he was here earlier.
The first time I was in a recording studio when my friend's hardcore band in high school went to record, Eli was in there.
Tell me about, you mentioned something about that. How did that go?
Well, we're 17 years old, and we're in the studio that's like these guys who are selling us records who were like worshiping them, basically. We're like 16, and these guys are like in their 20s, and they're grown-ups, and they're like in these really great bands. And then the guy who was making these records named Don Zientara was like...
Legend.
And you go in, and he's so cool and so encouraging, and even though you're 17 years old, he takes you very seriously and treats you like you're a pro when you kind of don't know what you're doing necessarily. And then so the next day we met Eli, and Eli was a little closer in age, but also just Eli. He's like, at that point, I found a journal entry, and I was like, that guy Eli is okay, but, and of course now he's one of my best friends. I love the guy so much.
I love Eli. We just had sushi with him.
Yeah, we've spent so many so many hours in the studio with him, and I've learned a lot from Eli too.
And tell him where Eli works now, of all places, that guy.
He's the music director for the Seth Meyers show, Late Night with Seth Meyers. Yeah, he's, what
do they call it, a meal ticket? Is that the right term for that? What would that be? What
golden handcuffs? I don't know.
Yeah, golden handcuffs. Oh my God.
Like a logical thing, and yet there he is.
Now, you mentioned about you getting that your Grammy, not even nominated, you actually have a Grammy. Can you explain to me, like, how did a guy
Best
coming
comedy
from DC
album
punk scene end up being
I guess
a
that's
Grammy?
not a very obvious thing, too. So Adam Schlesinger, in addition to being in one of the main songwriters for Fountains of Wayne, was also a very prolific and very ambitious writer of music in all manners of television, film, and theater. And so he got the job doing the music, writing songs for the Stephen Colbert Christmas special. And Stephen Colbert is a very musical person and loves music and loves, and had this idea for doing a variety show that was a joke, like a spoof on the old ones, but also fun and good. And so he hired Adam to write all the music for it. And because it was Stephen Colbert, he was able to get like Elvis Costello and John Legend and Willie Nelson, Keith
all
Urban.
In your presence, you're putting mics around them.
I mean, it's just kind of like, really? Is this happening right now? Like,
were you told not to look in their eyes or things like that or weird stuff?
No, everybody was cool. Willie Nelson made a point of going around and saying hello to every single person in the studio. I mean, the guy was just like a tremendously generous person. Like, just so...
If we can all only be
everybody would...
Great.
No one's going to forget that moment of like meeting this, this legend. And so we're doing the Willie Nelson song, which was called Little Dealer Boy. It was like instead of Little Drummer Boy.
yeah, Little Dealer Boy. I love that.
Right? And so we do the run through, and like I'm in the control room recording Willie Nelson on my my laptop
What mic did you
praying.
put? Like, what mic do you put on Willie
It was
Nelson?
I think it was an SM7 is what they had. It might have been one
He's
of those.
just singing, no acoustic. Or is that
Yeah, he was just singing. It was a
okay?
TLM actually, but he had the guitar with a hole in it. I was like, oh my god, it's that guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Of course it is. Like that's what he plays.
Yeah,
It was a TLM 103, I think is
yeah,
what it was. So he's singing and he does a run through, and didn't he write "Crazy," the Patsy Cline classic? Like this is a guy who's been doing this since our parents were children.
yep, yep,
So.
yep.
And I can tell what's happening here is that Adam is trying to figure out how to guide Willie to where he wants to go
He
with the
has a
melody.
vision, and Willie's just doing
Willie's
what Willie
just kind of
does.
doing Willie's thing.
Yeah.
And Willie, because he's so experienced and so gentle, but so like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, this guy's high at 10 in the morning. Dude, the
Yeah.
guy is on point. Like,
Okay.
we're 2 run-throughs. We're about to start the third.
Uh-huh.
We realize, this might take some work because he's not really singing the song exactly the way that it had been written, and he knew where this was going.
Yeah.
And so many years of experience, and just he knew exactly how. It was like master class in Jedi mind tricks, where it's like he just turns, not missing a beat. Young man, I'm probably not going to sing this song exactly the way you wrote it. I hope that's okay. And the 3 of us, me, Stephen Gold, who was Adam's producing partner, and Adam, we all looked at each other like, of course it's okay. You're Willie Nelson. You do whatever you want.
Yeah, right.
And it was kind of like, I'd never seen anybody talk to Adam in a way that both simultaneously completely gave him no options. Because you got to like let him do his thing, and that's what you're going to get. And you should, And a year later, we were kissing our Grammys. So.
Oh my God! Dude. Who else was within those musicians that were?
So that was
in that show.
That show was Toby Keith, Feist, John Legend, really, Elvis Costello.
Even Elvis is just like crazy.
John Stewart.
That's the guy.
Yeah.
So you got your Grammy. Where is it?
It's at home. My wife put it on a bookshelf, so I'm like, come on.
Your family's got to be proud. That's a milestone.
Yeah, my kids definitely like to talk about that at school.
Wow.
Like, my dad has a Grammy.
Well, like I technically should be Grammy nominated, but someone had stopped that from happening, and it's a weird thing because I think we had to talk about that. I think destiny leads you to where you are, and I think keeping it positive meant that if I had a choice to be Grammy nominated, like in theory, and then not be here because I changed my course by taking a negative path, I think the path that I've been on, I've loved it. Being here,
dude, you in a control room,
music.
like your positive energy is infectious, and I think that's something that I always appreciate. And I think, I tend to be a very.
It was fun, man. It was humorous today. It was cool, Well, Alex was in a band called Red Verse, who I really loved, and I'd worked with them. And my story with Alex was, it isn't that strange to think that he came in from another city, met me in New York to do a vocal. Because our other experience was he lived in San Francisco. I don't know him. He flies to LA, does vocals with me. We don't know each other, but we had a great time. Then he hated the vocals, not what happened in the studio, but his performance. And then I suggested, well, my friend has a studio in Oahu. Why don't we just fly to Hawaii and we'll make a record there? And he's like, great idea, Manny. I'm like, why didn't I think of that 1,000 times before? So
yeah, let's just go to Hawaii. What the hey?
We went to Hawaii. And my friend Dimitri Marmash, what's up, D? He has this wonderful studio that was in Kailua, which is considered one of the top 10 beaches in the world or United States. And it's on the other side of Waikiki. And his studio, literally, you'd walk out the door, you would go across the street, walk down a sand path, and you open up to Kailua Beach. And it was just, oh my God, you put your feet in the sand and you're just
God. I am so relaxed and ready to sing.
That's so, we would be singing, since he had such a tough time relaxing enough when he came into LA, I thought, okay, he'd sing for an hour or two, and I'd say, dude, go jump in the water. All right. We had a camera down there because it was a 2-story studio. I would just see him like take off his shirt, run. 25 minutes later, he's drying off his hair. We had a bottle of rum. He was drinking rum and singing. And, man, we had the greatest time. So Alex, coming into here with you, knowing our history of how we've done these crazy vocals, I thought and today was probably the smoothest we ever did. I mean, it was just like he got it, his
He
confidence.
seemed like he really had confidence, but he also knew what he wanted to do, and it was like
that's the part that's tough because the artist is usually right or always right, and I think that when he had problems before, I had to listen to him and swallow my pride. Like I couldn't fix what he wasn't happy with in his life, in his head. And that's another thing for producers. You have to realize that I think one of the jokingly things that I always say is like when people complain or unhappy, people complain at Disneyland. You know, it's the happiest place on earth, and they're complaining about the rides and the lines and how this happened and that happened. So people coming into a studio, which should be paradise, is sometimes the hardest thing in the world to do.
I would say for me, as a person who wears multiple hats like yourself, when I wear the engineer hat, part of that job is trying to proactively keep things from going off the rails, which means you're constantly looking for problems right before they manifest. The problem with that is in life, when you're constantly looking for things that are going to go wrong, it doesn't always come off that well to other people.
Yeah.
And keeping that positive energy is not an easy thing when you're also looking for the things that are going to be the problems. And then learning how to communicate about those things. Some people, I think you're probably one of them, it comes more naturally. For me, I'm a little direct, so it doesn't come naturally to me. I definitely think that I've had to learn how to be a little bit, gentler, shall we say.
Well, I think everybody has that. For my first years of recording, I'll say I'm an asshole, but it would be like, it'd be things over like a guy'd be playing piano terrible for 2 hours, and then I would say something like, "Dude, you play piano worse than my friend's sister. Can you like move?" And I would be like, really, it was bad. It's things not to do in a studio. Do not. And what I learned of recently is
don't make people feel like shit.
Yeah.
It doesn't get good performances out of them most of the time until it does.
And I learned my lesson after that because he was, to this day, probably still hurt that I said he played piano like a girl. And it's bad.
There's no good girl piano players out there.
And it's bad. So in retrospect, I learned my lesson hard, and I think that now that when I work with bands and stuff, I really try to make them feel not only they have my full attention, but being special. But like you, making the artist comfortable, I think is one thing I will say. The artist is always right. Let them follow through with these, wild, down the rabbit hole sometimes to a certain point. And they always come back to maybe your original idea if you can let it go. And that's like the hardest thing, to suck up your pride and be like, there are some producers that think they know it all, and you have to do that. I mean, look at Wall of Sound guy carrying a gun around and put it to people's heads like, you're going to do that vocal again or I'm going to kill you in a recording studio. And they would have to be scared and go in there. The Ramones were held by gunpoint, you know what I mean? And, berated,
going back to like why I started wanting to do this in the first place, I think that and I'm sure this is similar for you, like the reason that those bands that I were so influential to me, it isn't really so much the music when I look at it at this point in my life, because I like a lot of different kinds of music, and I don't listen to early 80s DC hardcore records all that often these days.
Oh, you don't?
I mean, sometimes, but
you play in a band with still DC hardcore guys.
I do, yes.
Can you name something about your band too? He's actually in a.
We're in a krautrock band with me, Eli Janney, Sohrab Habibian, who is my bandmate in Edsel and who plays in a band called Savak now, and James Canty, who was in The Makeup and Nation of Ulysses and Ted Leo
I'm
and the
friends
Pharmacist.
with Tim Green, another guy that people should know about. Tim Green is one of the greatest producers out on the West Coast, and also he was in a band called the Fucking Champs and Nation of Ulysses.
So our band is called ZNZ, 202, which is German for 202, which is the area code for Washington, D.C., since we're all local. Anyway.
Conspiracy. How in the hell do we have the same shoes?
Because they're comfy shoes, and when you're in a studio.
What are these shoes that we're wearing?
Blundstones.
From Australia?
Yeah.
Mine are steel-toed. Are yours steel-toed?
No,
And if you notice, mine look really good.
Yeah, they do.
When I arrived, when I got to the convention.
Did you get them polished at the airport?
No, I got them here at the convention. It was $6, and I was just over the moon.
They look like $1 million.
Anyways, back off shoes. Back to you.
Just saying, the spirit of that community of wanting to make something, of wanting to make your statement, and also having been a musician, I feel like that's an energy that's really important to keep in the studio. Of like,
Yeah.
what I was once asked by somebody who I ended up working with for a while, like, what kind of bands do I look for, like,
Yeah.
and I like a lot of different kinds of music within, guitar rock or whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
jazz or whatever. I like people that take their art seriously but want to have a good time.
Yeah.
And I think that people who want to be miserable, those are the ones I try to avoid, because even if you make great art, you're not going to enjoy doing it, and then you won't feel good about what you made. But if you can enjoy it, then even if it isn't your best record, it might be your most fun record. And by fun, I mean, like, you might feel really truly like you were given an
Enthusiastic about it.
opportunity.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
to me, it's those experiences that, hopefully that experience leads to making a great record. And
Yeah.
I think more often than not, it probably does. But
Well, I have a theory of sometimes people, and I mean this speaking about people generally. Sometimes when people are going down, they like to take people with them. And it's like if someone's drowning, they say sometimes they can drown you as well.
sure.
So the personalities could be toxic within a studio. And I think that even as a producer, if you're working with someone who you really love and their music is amazing, but they're so toxic that every day you feel damaged from them, there may be a point that you have to reconsider ever working with them. And I've done that in my life where I felt like someone was probably one of the most iconic persons I'd ever want to work with. But one day when it became a little bit shadier, and I don't mean like shady as people, just it felt a heaviness, a darkness about recording and coming into every day. Then it wasn't really important to me anymore, and and that was a lesson also that you should really do what you love and do it with the people that you really love, and even if you don't know them and they're strangers, we can work together. And I think that it's a learning. I learned a lot from working with you today, and I learned a lot from
I did too, man.
the history of how you got here, which is somewhat. I had the same path as you. Um,
I remember hearing the Distortion Felix record that Johnny had given me a copy of it and being like,
what's that?
how did he get those sounds? I don't know how he did it. I want to know how to do this. This is
Wow, thank you.
yeah.
I've never really worked in a nice studio like this in my life. I always have my own studios.
That's incredible to me, because you seem like so comfortable and at home, and
I
like
wish
your cool tricks. You're like, oh, do it like this.
It's all from I don't even know what that's from. But like I remember one time the last thing I'll sum this up, when I walked out of my studio, I think it was in the early 2000s. I looked up at the sky and I'm like, am I ever gonna work? I literally was talking to myself saying, will I ever work in a nice studio? And 1 year later, no, 3 years later, I have a driver. I'm in a 5-star hotel. I'm in London, England, and I'm being driven to Abbey Road, and I'm mastering the Breeders record for Kim Deal from the Pixies. Dave Sardi's up in the Beatles room with Oasis. I call Dave, and he's like, how'd you get this number, Manny? I'm like, I'm downstairs, and I came up, and Dave was really cool and introduced me. But the crazy thing is I got to see how Oasis and him were making the record. And if you've ever seen pictures of the Beatles, it's like these room with these big doors that can close and go smaller. It almost looked like a football field with like these big, like, I don't know, like Godzilla lived in there and they locked it up. So and I remember they had like 3 drum sets up. I'm not even lying. There was how people rake and they have a pile of leaves. There was a pile of guitar pedals, like just a mound of them, and it was just amazing to watch. Once again, a story about recording, but there I am, wishing I could see what a nice it is. So I think to people out there, you should always make a little note to yourself about what you want to do, where you want to go, who you want to be there with. And then I will say that if you really believe in yourself, that it's probably going to happen. So, I mean, what are some of the records that they can go out and look for, or that you're proud of? Like, even with me, like I just met you, what records could I go out and listen to and go, oh, that's Jeff?
Okay, so I'd say the first thing that I would think of, which is a long time ago, was in 2003, this band sort of dropped into my lap.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Eli and I going to see them at Mercury Lounge, and
Mm-hmm.
like every single person in the room was a music industry or a
Mm-hmm.
studio guy or a producer. And I just remember thinking, this band's amazing, and there's no way I'm going to get within 5 feet of these guys.
Yeah.
But they went and started to make a record with somebody, and that got weird. And so they ended up coming to Stratosphere, and we made this record that I, at the time, thought, okay, this is going to put me on the map. And totally didn't. I mean, I really did, because the first record, the band was called The Secret Machines, and the record called
them.
Now Here Is Nowhere. And I'm like, this record
I saw them in LA.
It's such a good record, and I just
there was
like,
so much hype on that band. Were they the one that painted all their stuff white?
Yep.
I remember. I actually think I saw them at Spaceland.
And they were amazing. And that record is like so good. The songs are just like, it was just like, wow, this is, and yet somehow it managed to shuffle. Not really kind of, then they made the next record, and I was like, wait a minute, what about me? But then of course it's like, that was a lesson, like, I was in a band, you never do the same thing twice. Yeah. And I love those guys. And then I got, and I kept being friends with them. And like, I ended up doing stuff with Benjamin, who was the guitar player who passed away in his next band. And Brandon Curtis, who's the singer and keyboard bass player, great guy. And like, he just sent me a copy of their last record, and it's awesome.
Nice.
So that's a record where I just thought,
record.
That's like, I think that's maybe one of those engineer records where it's like people hear like, oh, this sounds amazing. Mm-hmm. Then I guess the next thing I would say, going chronologically, is I mixed a couple songs on the Not a Surf record, The Weight is a Gift.
Wow, I love that.
And I love those songs, and that's another great band, and really proud of those. And then I did, I guess the last Fountains of Wayne record is the one I sort of feel like, which is called Sky Full of Holes, is the one I feel like I kind of contributed the most to. And I'd say in the Renegade Studios era, some of my favorite things have been working with, Little Steven. I mean, I did 2 Disciples of Souls records, and those are
awesome.
Perhaps the most incredible project was working with Darlene Love, who is, a figure from the history who had never made a full-length solo record. She had been a singer in Crystals, and she sort of misses Christmas, right? Her Christmas song, Baby Please Come Home. And I remember 2013, looking out the window, we had just done our first session with her, looking at the Empire State Building. It was December 23rd, and just thinking to myself, I cannot believe I'm in a recording studio with Mrs. Christmas
on Christmas.
I mean, it was just like magical. And, it took a while to figure out when the next session was going to happen. But then that session included all kinds of, Elvis Costello came and played on that. And Paul Schaefer came and played on it. And it was just like this incredible thing where everybody wanted. Adam played piano on a couple songs. It was, that was just awesome.
There was somewhat of Stephen being a magnet of positivity, of people wanting to not only be around him, but when he seems like when he makes something, he's so full into it that it almost is successful in the sense of making him happy. Like this studio.
I mean,
it's like, what the heck? Does he really have the time to do this? And he made time.
He loves it, and it's like I think it's a happy place, or one of them.
This is the point where we give our shout outs. I'd like to give a shout out to Warren and Eric and Lee from Produce Like a Pro for kind of supporting me to make this happen, where here I am doing one of my first episodes, filming and speaking with someone I was very enthusiastic for. And I'd like to give a shout out to Johnny Temple for making this happen. I'd like to give a shout out to my wife Jane. Shout outs. Who are your shout outs?
Well, I'd like to shout out, I guess, to my wife, Jenny, and my kids, Alexi and Jesse, and, of course, little Steven, without whom this wouldn't be happening right now, and he's an awesome person to work with and to work for, and Johnny Temple, Eli Janney, and Alexis and Scott, because we love you too, and,
Well, I'm hopefully tonight we're going to...
One more?
Yeah.
All the awesome, wicked, cool artists I've had the privilege of working with in the last 10 years.
There you go. Well, New York City has been very kind to me, and this is your home, and thanks for sharing your home.
Hey, man, thank you for coming.
Oh, man, it was such a good time.